All right. So, just by way of a quick devotional, I just want to point out something to you. When the Israelites left out of Egypt, right? They were not necessarily a well rounded biblical group, right? Right out of the get-go. They were complaining and murmuring from the very beginning as well, right? They were complaining about food, they complained about water, they complained at the Red Sea, they complained about the bitter waters of Marah, and so all of these different things. But if I was to ask you, when did the first Israelite die coming out of Egypt? When would you say? Because they were a rebellious people, and God often judged their rebellion. And so if I was to say, when did the first Israelites die after leaving Egypt, where would you say?
God's hand or the Amalekites?
So the Amalekites would have been the first people that killed them, but that wasn't even God's judgment. So that brings up the point, the Amalekites came in, but yet even that wasn't God's judgment. And that is perhaps part of why the Lord was so upset with the Amalekites, was because they were messing with the type, I think, if you will. It comes after the giving of the law, right? Which I think is interesting, that from the time they are set free to the time that they come to Mount Sinai, God doesn't judge any of them, even though they are just as rebellious during that season as they are anywhere else, perhaps more. Most of the things that we think about their rebellion took place right in the beginning. Complaining about food, complaining about water, all that stuff, it happens in other places as well, but it's right off the bat. They are very complaining, talking about they wish they had gone back to Egypt and all this kind of stuff. But yet God doesn't judge any of them during any of that season.
Does that have anything to do with the sons of Korah, or is that much later?
Well, the sons of Korah, that was the people that rose up against Moses, and so I guess what I would say is not so much the specific. I believe if I'm not mistaken, it was probably when Moses came down off of Mount Sinai and they killed the 3,000 there after the golden calf. But my point is not so much exactly what it was, but to draw the distinction that it doesn't occur until after they arrive at Mount Sinai. And so I think that there is a picture of grace from Egypt to Mount Sinai, and whereas they are not under that law covenant. They are under just the Abrahamic covenant at that point, right? Because God hasn't given them the 10 Commandments. He hasn't given them the law. They haven't stood around the mountain and say, we will obey all of these things that you've asked us to do. And so the Bible talks about where the law is given, it creates an awareness of sin, it creates judgment. And so I think it's just kind of interesting that we see God dealing with them differently after they have received the law than he deals with them before they receive the law. That before the law, it is a picture of grace, which is what we are under now, right? That Christ is the seed of Abraham, that God spoke those covenants to Abraham, that Christ is the seed of Abraham, and that we are in many ways under that grace system. And so I just think it's kind of interesting to go back in and look that even though they were rebellious, even though they questioned the Lord, even though they were doing all kinds of things wrong, God showed them grace and mercy all the way through until they arrive at Mount Sinai. And then so Amalek comes along in the middle and starts fighting and killing some people, and it kind of messes up the picture there of what God is doing, that he judges no one up until the point of the law. And so he says, because Amalek did this, we're going to wipe them out utterly. And they become the arch enemies, if you will, of the Lord in terms of Israel's people. This was the group that God said to Saul, I want you to utterly wipe them out. And Saul didn't, and so that's why God removed Saul and put David in his place. comes back to the same group of people that attacked them while they were under this season of grace before they had gotten to the mountain. So anyways, that's just something kind of interesting to think about, that prior to the giving of the law, there was this Abrahamic kind of promise and blessing over their life. And so it's just kind of interesting to see the kind of connections between that they were often judged differently after the giving of the law than they were before.
You want to look it up in Joshua or in
To see that, it would be Exodus. They leave, was it Exodus 12 or somewhere around there, and then it carries all the way over to maybe 18. 17 is the Amalekites. They arrive at Sinai at 19. The Amalekites attacked them, by the way, at Rephidim. All right, at Rephidim. But Rephidim is right next to Sinai. Rephidim is kind of like the valley area just outside of Sinai. So they were close. I mean, they were right there. If this is, obviously this is Mount Sinai, and it's all black because it's burned. And then there's all this valley area around here. And then on the other side of a kind of another mountain range here is another flat area called Rephidim, right? And this is where a lot of stuff happens. So they're right there in this zone, right? And so when the Amalekites had attacked them, I mean, they were basically in that zone where they were going to be. And so right after the Amalekites attacked them here, and probably one of these mountains would have been where Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to fight during the battle. Then after that, then they just came around and camped at the base of the mountain. But you'd have been able to see Sinai from Rephidim. I mean, they were right there. This is the largest mountain in that area, and so you can see it from Rephidim, right?